My husband set me up for cheating, then brought his pregnant side chick to my birthday party. So I exposed his affair and took everything. It all began when I was a 28-year-old personal assistant dealing with the death of my father. Losing a parent leaves you feeling extremely alienated and empty, as anyone who has experienced it knows. I was going through a very difficult emotional time. Then along walked Harry, a charming older man who seemed to know just what to say to brighten my spirits. We had a cliché story at first, which may have contributed to my feelings for him. At the time, he was everything I was searching for: safe, dependable, and affectionate. We used to go on beautiful dates, and he always treated me like a gentleman. My mother loved him from the start. When I first met his parents, there was some difficulty because we came from different ethnic backgrounds, but they eventually warmed up to me. His sister Evelyn and I hit it off immediately away and grew quite close. We chat on a regular basis and frequently go shopping or have lunch together. Evelyn feels like the sister I always wanted but never had. She and I talk about everything, and I sometimes feel quite grateful that she is in my life because of my spouse. Harry and I were still in the midst of our lovey-dovey phase when he impulsively proposed to me. He had caught me completely off guard by throwing a surprise engagement party and invited all of our loved ones. Without hesitation, I answered sure. I can still remember our family's smiles as they raved about how Harry and I were meant to be together. I admit that for a long time, I believed it completely. Our wedding went off without a hitch, and we spent 2 weeks on honeymoon in Mexico. It wasn't until we got home that reality hit us hard. Moving into his apartment proved difficult, because he was quite picky about his stuff, and refused to let me change anything in his living room or bedroom. I tried to make a compromise by suggesting that I gradually include my style throughout the house so he could get used to it. However, he took issue with the extent of my closet, arguing that no one in their right mind would need that many garments. While I'm no fashion influencer, like any other woman, I had a wardrobe that I didn't want to part with. He urged that I minimize my clothes as much as possible since he did not want me to take up half of his wardrobe space. Recognizing his fears, I agreed. I did not want him to feel cramped in his own place. Instead of keeping my things in our bedroom, I chose to use the guest room as my closet. Next, he had a problem with my refrigerator magnets. Growing up, I had a strong desire to travel. So when I finally got a job, I made an effort to save money and travel as much as possible. One of my little traditions was to gather fridge magnets from each new place I went, and proudly put them on my fridge as souvenirs of my travels. However, Harry always thought they were gaudy and cheap-looking. He vehemently refused to put any of my magnets on our refrigerator. We had numerous intense debates about it, but he eventually advised us not to begin our marriage on shaky footing, so I reluctantly agreed to let it go. During the first 2 years of my marriage, I spent a lot of time hanging out with my family and friends. Harry, on the other hand, was more of a homebody, especially because he worked long hours and frequently felt exhausted. I enjoyed being social and going out with my friends, so I didn't mind going out on my own occasionally. Harry would propose that I stay at home, but we still made time for date nights twice a week, which I valued. Most evenings I preferred to spend time with him, but I also enjoyed meeting up with other people. Similarly, he had his own interests, such as spending Sundays with his golf mates, which I never objected to. However, during the 3rd year of our marriage, I observed a change in Harry's conduct. When we got married, we were quite clear that we didn't want children. But then, Harry started telling me that he wanted to be a father, and that he would love to have a baby with me. This surprised me, and I reminded myself that we had both decided not to become parents. But Harry dismissed it, saying he wanted to see me with a pregnant belly. His statements made me feel quite uneasy. On other times, he insisted on not wearing a condom, which made me even more concerned that he was attempting to force me pregnant. I had several chats with him, trying to figure out why he suddenly wanted to be a father, when he had previously stated that he enjoyed the fact that we didn't have any extra duties from having children. Harry insisted that once I was pregnant and could quit my job, our marriage would be great. The notion of losing my job made me afraid. I understand that many of you may disagree, but after seeing my gynecologist, I chose to start using birth control pills. Thankfully it worked and I never became pregnant. Meanwhile, Harry's behavior became increasingly erratic. He even started asking me questions about who I was hanging out with and where we were heading. When I wanted to spend time with my friends, he would comment on the attire I wore, which surprised me because I've always dressed modestly. He would tell me that I should cover myself more, even if I was wearing a regular shirt and a jacket, since he was concerned about what other males would think if they saw me. I ignored it at first, but he eventually became more forceful, asking that I change into a different costume before heading out. It made me feel uneasy and apprehensive about our connection. A few weeks later, I noticed that some of my favorite garments were missing from my wardrobe. I thought I was going mad at first and searched the entire home for them. When I asked Harry about it, he said he had no idea. However, while going through the garage, I discovered my things tucked inside an empty shoebox. I was furious, and I confronted him about it. He initially denied knowing anything about it, but I reminded him that there were only the two of us in the house, so he couldn't evade responsibility this time. After considerable arguing, he finally revealed that he had concealed my clothes so that I wouldn't wear them when I went out with friends. I was shocked and enraged. He continued to rationalize it, stating that he was just trying to save my face because women who dressed like that were frequently regarded as characterless or easy by guys. I lost my cool and yelled at him, saying he had gone nuts and had no right to tell me what I could or could not wear. I pointed out to him that I had been married to him for 3 years and had never been disloyal, so why would he be concerned about what other men thought? I made it plain that no reasonable person would behave in such a domineering manner with their relationship. Finally, he apologized, and because this was the first strange thing he had ever done to me, I assumed he was going through a phase or something, so I let it go. However, it only got worse. I started noticing that messages from my friends and family were inexplicably disappearing from my phone. For example, if I had a communication with my mother and planned to meet up, I would find no record of our interaction a few days later. It completely puzzled me. At first, I suspected it was a problem with my phone, so I updated it to resolve any potential concerns. Then one of my friends called to invite me to a little party she was throwing at her house with her close pals, and asked if I was available. She said she will send me the party invitation soon. However, I never got them on my phone. When she contacted me later to ask why I hadn't responded, I said that I had never received a message from her following our talk. It wasn't until I attended her party that weekend that she revealed that she had sent me the invitation, which I had never received. Everything seemed odd and disturbing. I began to suspect that my phone had been hacked, so I purchased a new phone for myself. I'm an emotional hoarder, therefore I didn't want to sell my old phone in case I could fix it later. Throughout this period, I'd been discussing these weird incidents with my husband, Harry, and he looked as perplexed as I was. However, when I acquired my new phone, I forgot to tell him. That night, I awoke feeling extremely thirsty and got up to fetch some water. As I entered the living room, I was surprised to discover my husband kneeling on the sofa, holding both phones in his hands. It took a bit for my eyes to adjust, but once they did, I could see him scrolling through my phone. I couldn't suppress my disbelief and irritation, so I asked him loudly what the heck he was doing. He jumped, evidently taken off guard by my unexpected entrance. He began rambling about how clearly I was cheating because I had purchased another phone without asking him. He continued on a diatribe about how he should never have trusted me, as I stood there stunned, trying to understand what was going on in the middle of the night. I calmly mentioned to him that he was already aware of the problems I was having with my previous phone, and that I had just purchased a new phone that I had not yet set up, so he could have simply waited for me to tell him the following day. I asked him again what he was doing with both of my phones in his hands in the middle of the night, and he tried to explain that he was simply checking to see if there were any problems with my phone. I took my phone from his grasp and discovered that he had opened my chats on the old phone. A realization hit me like a lightning bolt. I discovered Harry was deleting my communications, which was why I wasn't receiving invitations from my friends and family. Meanwhile, he kept saying that he couldn't sleep and had come out to watch TV when he came upon my new phone on my bedside table and began curiously searching through it. He stated he was also scanning my old phone for bugs that I might have missed. I looked at him blankly and asked him straight if he had been deleting my messages from my phone. Hearing this, Harry grew furious and adamantly denied it, telling me it was ridiculous to even ask him such a question. He emphasized that he would never do something like that. Despite his denial, I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling that something was wrong. I pointed out to him that he was plainly reading my texts in the middle of the night, and he had no reason to deny it. I couldn't understand why he'd do that to me. I informed him that because he was deleting my communications, I was unable to meet up with my friends and family. It seemed like a betrayal on many levels, and I couldn't understand why he would ruin my connections with my loved ones in such a subtle way. I couldn't bring myself to look him in the eyes again. I was completely appalled and chose to believe my gut impulses. I informed him that he had crossed a line this time, and that I needed some space. I started packing my luggage, planning to live with my mother for a bit. He begged me not to leave, eventually admitting that he had been deleting my texts just to spend more time with me. I couldn't see how he could justify such a violation of privacy, especially because I'd previously spent a lot of time with him. Later, when I told my mother, she agreed that what he had done was weird. However, she also emphasized that I was fortunate to have a spouse who still loved me so passionately after all these years, even if his actions were incorrect. Despite her remarks, I couldn't ignore the sense of betrayal and discomfort. My spouse was always calling and texting me. His messages ranged from an apology to blaming me for leading him to believe I was cheating on him. For the next few days, I turned off my phone and attempted to divert myself by assisting my mother around the house. I'm not sure why, but I knew something was wrong with Harry and had no idea what to do about it. It was as if I was too dense to acknowledge the fact to myself. Fortunately, Evelyn showed up to comfort me. She was as disturbed as I was to learn about what her brother had done to me. Now, I know many of you assume she would naturally favor her brother because they are linked by blood, but Evelyn is completely a girl's girl. She assured me that what I was experiencing was entirely normal, because no spouse should wake up in the middle of the night to check his wife's phone and respond the way Harry did. Especially because I had never done anything to lead him to be so suspicious. She acknowledged that there was something wrong, and offered to explore by speaking with him. I felt much better after talking to her, and I hoped she could persuade Harry to see sense. I turned on my phone after talking to Evelyn since I felt much better. However, Harry besieged me with angry text messages. He seemed like a new person, and in some of his messages, he threatened to divorce me and leave me with nothing, just as my father did. This was very out of character for him, and I couldn't figure out what I did to make him so angry. I also observed that there were no fresh messages that day, so I assumed he had realized his error and was feeling contrite. I thought he'd call me eventually so we could work it out. However, 2 days later, Evelyn called to inform me that she had some news, which I might not like. When she arrived, she was outraged and showed me images on her phone, shot outside of Harry's house. In the photos, a young blonde woman is entering our home. I didn't comprehend what it meant, until Evelyn informed me Harry had been cheating on me. It felt like I had lost all of my breath. I just nodded my head as Evelyn went on to tell me that she had been watching this girl go in and out of Harry's house for the past 2 days, and feared her brother was having an affair. My entire body shook, and I felt like vomiting. Evelyn attempted to hug me, but I shrugged her off and dashed into my bathroom. The world around me was whirling, and I was experiencing a dull ache in my brain. I kept thinking that this couldn't be true, and that perhaps there was a simpler explanation. When I came out of the restroom, Evelyn had a frightened expression on her face. My mother, who had been informed by Evelyn about what my husband had done, looked at me furiously. I attempted to brush it off and explain that it was probably a housekeeper or one of Harry's co-workers. But the more I attempted to explain to them why a young woman like her was going to meet my husband when he and I were fighting, the more I noticed Evelyn and my mother staring at me with pathetic expressions that made me nauseated. My mother gently sat me down, but I just stared at the floor. Evelyn informed me that she wanted to believe her brother wasn't cheating, but the facts showed otherwise. She then inquired if Harry had contacted me over the last 2 days, and I shook my head. She remained silent, and I burst into tears. I can't begin to express how devastated you are when you learn your marriage has ended. I will state that Evelyn and Mom sat by me on the floor, soothing me in their own manner. When I began to feel better, my mother apologized for believing my cowardly husband might ever change, and offered to help me find a divorce lawyer. Evelyn agreed, and said she would look into this mystery woman further, which could help me with my divorce from my husband. I didn't do much more than nod. I simply wanted to sleep, so they left me to get into my bed and pretend everything was a nightmare. However, like every other person who had been cheated on, I awoke with a dull pang in my chest, and the understanding gradually dawned that the love of my life had cheated on me. Evelyn had texted me images of the woman entering our home, so I zoomed in as much as possible to see how young she appeared. I couldn't believe that my miserable spouse, instead of talking to me like a normal person, had decided to hook up with a random individual, which made me even angrier. If my husband thought he could do whatever he wanted, and I would simply crawl back to him, he was in for a big surprise. I was going to file for divorce and seize all he had ever possessed. I spoke with my mother, and we began researching good divorce lawyers in the region so that we could schedule appointments with them. Evelyn called me anytime she could to check on me. When I hired a divorce lawyer, the first thing he told me was that we needed to employ a private investigator, PI, to gather as much evidence as possible to ensure I received the most out of the divorce. Hiring a private investigator was expensive, but I didn't mind as long as Harry learned his lesson and never tried to mess with me again. Throughout this time, Harry only messaged me twice, both times asking if I was prepared to apologize to him. The messages simply made me angry. There were so many things I wanted to say, but I knew that saying them would alert him to the divorce, and I wanted to witness his reaction when I handed him the papers. Harry never bothered to show up at my mother's house because, in his head, he still believed that his reaction to my phones was completely justified. Meanwhile, my lawyer advised me that the PI was accumulating a lot of strong information, and Harry's relationship with this young woman seemed serious, since they met up literally every day. This led us to suspect that she was not just a random hookup, and that they had been having an affair for a while. Evelyn also discovered, after hours of internet research, that this young woman was named Georgina, and was just 23 years old. The most alarming fact was that this woman had a criminal record, and was wanted in another state, because she had been involved in auto theft as a child while working for a gang. This meant that my husband had been having an affair with a potential criminal, which was quite upsetting to discover. Georgina recently worked as a stripper, so she most likely lied to everyone about her past. Evelyn and I chatted, and we both agreed that this was a serious problem that Harry needed to know the truth about. We decided to arrange a covert meeting with my in-laws without Harry knowing, and I told them everything that had been going on. At first, Harry's parents, who had no idea we were having marital troubles, were astonished to hear this. They told me how Harry had been lying to them for weeks, claiming everything was all right. At home, Evelyn showed them images of Georgina, and we had more evidence of what the PI had discovered. Harry's parents were outraged that their own son could commit something so heinous. Harry's mother grabbed me and informed me that they had my back, and they were horrified that their son had chosen to have an affair with a criminal stripper. We all devised a plot to catch him red-handed, so his parents could intervene and I could present him the divorce papers. My birthday was in a few days, so his parents made the time to call Harry right away and request that he arrange a big party for me, his wife, this year, so we could all celebrate together. Harry tried to get out of it by casually mentioning that I probably wouldn't want a large celebration, hoping that his parents wouldn't find out what was really going on in our marriage. But his dad doubled down, stating he had already talked to me, and I had told him how I would absolutely adore it. Harry was surprised when his father suggested this, but eventually agreed to his parents' request to arrange a birthday celebration for me. Throughout this, he never mentioned that I wasn't even living with him at the time, or that he was seeing another lady. Later, Harry contacted me, or rather, he left me multiple missed calls because I refused to answer. He then messaged me, stating he would love to host a birthday party for me, and hoped I would let bygones be bygones by going for the sake of his parents. I responded as if this hadn't been the plan all along, telling him how thoughtful it was of him to do this, and that I would gladly come. On the day of my birthday, I had my divorce papers and images from my PI ready, in case Harry refused to acknowledge his affair. When my mother and I arrived at Harry's house, he did not greet us with a hug, and instead offered us a dry smile. We stepped in to find that the man had done nothing to prepare the house for my birthday celebrations. It resembled a frat house, with gray balloons placed indiscriminately about the living room, and the living room was exceedingly dirty. I strolled into the kitchen and saw a pile of unwashed dishes. Harry had bought takeaway pizza for the evening, which almost made me chuckle. When his parents arrived, Harry helped them settle down. We all pretended we had no idea what was going on, waiting for the appropriate moment to approach Harry. When Evelyn arrived, she brought gifts for me, and we all sat down for supper, making small talk here and there. We sliced my birthday cake and everyone congratulated me on being 36. When the doorbell rang, Harry dashed to open it. To everyone's surprise, he stepped in with Georgina's hand, who was dressed in a skimpy, sparkly dress and high heels. Harry absolutely ignored me and approached his parents, introducing Georgina, and explaining that he had been wanting to reveal something for a long time, and thought this was the right chance to do so. Harry then began to yell loudly that no one knew, but he was unhappy in his marriage with me because I emotionally mistreated him, and never considered his feelings. How I would gaslight him, manipulate him, and never be a decent wife to him. He went on to add that he recently discovered that I had cheated on him when he saw me using another phone, and that after confronting me about it, I had walked out on him. He paused for dramatic effect, and went on to claim that if it hadn't been for Georgina, he wouldn't have survived the final months of our collapsing marriage. He explained how he met her 6 months ago, and how one thing led to another, making him realize how horribly I had treated him. He went on to say that since I left, he and Georgina had been spending more time together and had lately discovered that she was 2 months pregnant. My eyes widened in disbelief, as this was new information that I was not prepared to absorb. I turned to look at Evelyn, and her mouth was hanging wide in disbelief as well. Harry went on to tell how I had failed as a woman by not being a good wife to him throughout our marriage. However, he was fortunate to find Georgina, and hoped that his parents would embrace her. My mother, who had clearly been fighting to control her rage up until this point, suddenly gave in to her intrusive thoughts. She rushed out of her chair and flung an entire glass of Sprite in Harry's face, yelling what a piece of garbage he was. Georgina looked horrified, while Harry appeared stunned. Evelyn then screamed at Harry, telling him that his game was over, and that everyone knew he was having an affair with this woman. She continued to tell him all she had learned about Georgina, including the fact that she was sought in another state for auto theft. I can't tell you how satisfying it was to witness my spouse lose all color in his face and fear. I realized then that this was the perfect opportunity to serve him with the divorce papers. I grabbed the papers from my coat and stepped across the table, delivering them to him. I informed him triumphantly that I was finished, and now that he had publicly admitted to having an affair, I was coming for all he possessed. My mother and I excused ourselves as we watched his parents and Evelyn continue to scold him. I was done with him and his drama, and I had no intention of staying any longer. Throughout the vehicle ride, my mother told me how proud she was to have raised a strong woman like me. I'm not sure what Evelyn and her parents said to Harry, but it must have been nasty because he continued phoning and texting me, wanting to chat. I awoke this morning to nearly 80 texts from Harry begging me to return to him and promising that he will change. He says he is willing to go to couple counseling, and that if I truly loved him, I would not give up so quickly. Now typically, I wouldn't think twice, but if you had asked me last year if I was ever going to divorce Harry, I would have said no. However, things have changed, and I am confident I am on the correct track now. While my intellect understands the proper thing to do, my heart aches for him, especially after reading his heartbreaking letters about how he can't live without me, and how he has always wanted to grow old with me. I don't trust my heart. So Reddit, am I an asshole for revealing my husband's double life to his family and eventually divorcing him? Update 1. Wow. When I shared this, I didn't anticipate so many people to be so negative. I've received hundreds of direct messages criticizing me for ever considering forgiving this nasty man. I get it, everyone. I will not go back to Harry. I want you all to quit being so rude to me. Now, when I posted this, I admit that I was feeling bad, so I went overboard. However, all of that guilt is gone, and I will never allow my husband's dumb statements sway me again. Also, to those who suggest I should just block him, I can't because my lawyer has told me to keep all contact channels open until the divorce is official. A number of you have also pointed out how Harry is still lying, and that he must have had an affair with this girl Georgina or another woman long back, which is why he had become so controlling and possessive in our relationship. I completely agree with that. However, I have no interest in discovering the truth since, whether or not it is true, I simply want this chapter of my life to be over. Update 2. It has been several months since my last update. For those who are curious, I did get an STD test, and am pleased to announce that I am clear, so at least I dodged that problem. Now my divorce is still dragging on. Harry's lawyer keeps finding excuses to push it off as long as possible, which is really annoying. But myself and my lawyer are determined not to give up. Harry's lawyer does not want me to make any claims against him. However, I paid for all of the house renovations during my 3 years of marriage. I decorated and prepared his basement so he could have his man cave. I paid for half of his car's loan, and I was the one who brought in food. Evelyn and Harry's parents have remained in touch with me. I met with Evelyn last month, and she informed me that she is engaged. She is getting married in the coming months and has already invited me to attend. I'm not sure if I should go because I don't want to meet Harry. But she has urged that I be there to support her on her special day. Evelyn also told me that Harry and Georgina had broken up. Apparently, after that big disaster on my birthday, Georgina informed him that she had been sleeping with multiple men, thus there was no assurance that she was pregnant with his child. She fled with another man, God knows where, perhaps afraid that we would report her to the police. Harry has been distraught since then and has blamed me, but his parents reminded him that it was entirely his fault. To be honest, I don't care about his sentiments or his breakup, and I'm hoping to share more positive news in my next update. I intend to speak with Harry's parents, and I'm hoping they can help me find a method to persuade Harry to divorce me as quickly as possible, so that I can move on from this. Update 3. Okay everyone, I did it. I am divorced. I can't believe I'm finally free. Harry and his lawyer tried everything they could to keep extending our case, but the court had had enough. Finally, Harry consented to give me all I had asked for. It turns out that Harry's parents had another conversation with him and threatened to deprive him of their fortune if he didn't eventually divorce me and cease the months and months of petty arguing. I am quite thrilled. Tonight, I want to finally go out with my pals and have the time of my life. I have also invited Evelyn, so we are all set to have a fantastic time. I'd like to thank everyone for following along with me and sending me encouraging DMs along this journey. Thanks for watching and diving into this wild family drama with me. If you love Reddit family drama, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. I funded my brother's college for 4 years, but he mocked me to my face. So I shut down every account and watched him panic. I am 31 years old and have been my family's unseen safety net for the most of the past 10 years. Someone had to step up after my dad fell into a debt hole and missed mortgage payments after losing his job during the 2008 crisis. At 22, I was that someone. I was sending money home while most of my pals were trekking throughout Europe or squandering their paychecks on expensive cocktails and concerts. It was just groceries at the start. The mortgage followed. Next came the tuition for my younger brother Jake, the cheerleading fees for my sister Rosalind, and my mother's monthly allowance, as she liked to refer to it, even though it had nothing to do with the month. Short this week, can you help? She would text, and I would arrange for it. Nobody inquired as to whether I had enough for myself. Nobody expressed gratitude. Instead, I received insulting comments. My mother detested the fact that I no longer attend church. My dad didn't consider my work in marketing to be a legitimate career. Jake made fun of the size of my place. I didn't drive 4 hours every weekend to visit, so Rosalind dubbed me emotionally unavailable, even though I was paying for the house they wanted me to return home to. But last Friday was the tipping point. It was meant to be an ordinary family phone call. I was discussing Rosalind's fall tuition, and the fact that my landlord had increased my rent once more on Zoom. I gently hinted that I might have to reduce the amount of help. You know what? We don't want to see your face anymore. Mom leaned in at that point and hung up. Uncertain of what had just transpired, I gazed at my computer. My text message to her bounced. Blocked. I then looked at my email. Silence on the radio. Dad didn't respond. Neither Rosalind nor Jake responded. As if I were an alien who had let them down, they had closed ranks. I ought to have sobbed or screamed. I felt cold instead. Unambiguous. I went to work after writing one final message which read, "You won't see my money either." Not at work, but at cutting off all of the financial support I had established for them. When you're the one pulling the strings, it's odd how easily things can fall apart. "You won't see my money either," I texted that morning, and then I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee. I wasn't rushing, for once. No rushing around with bank transfers. No figuring out in my head how much money I would have left over for groceries once everyone else had received their share. Just silence, the worthy kind of silence. The mortgage comes first. The payments came from me, even though my name wasn't on the deed. Like clockwork, A recurrent transfer was established years ago. 2 clicks were used to cancel. I verified it over the phone with the bank. I will no longer be sending money to their house from my account. Then there was Mom's joint account, which she utilized like a vending machine. I would arrange it up to allow her some independence and self-respect. She was able to treat me like an ATM more easily as a result. After draining the account, I closed it entirely. Upon being prompted to provide the reason by the bank agent, I hesitated for a moment before typing. Abuse of trust. The tuition payments followed. My email was still connected to Jake's college site. I canceled the saved payment method after logging in. It felt nice, so I even placed a note under billing contacts that read, "No longer financially responsible. The utilities are gone. Account for grocery delivery. Canceled." Even so, there was a moment of awkward silence when I called the landlord of their rental home and stated, "Hey, I won't be covering the rent anymore. You'll want to speak directly with the tenants from now on." His next words were, "Understood." Suddenly, I was at liberty. Not a word. No fireworks. Just a calm, strategic withdrawal. It was odd how simple it was to remove myself from their financial lives. It was like erasing files you didn't realize you were keeping. I wasn't worried about how to do too much for the first time in years. All I was doing was breathing. That stillness didn't last long, but I didn't anticipate a response at first. That night was the beginning. My phone buzzed as I was finishing dinner. Something easy. Something for me. Unknown figure. I let the voicemail go. Then one more. Then 2 consecutive texts. Jake's tuition was unsuccessful. Mom is going crazy. Give her a call. No names. Don't say hello, only demands. As if nothing had altered. The third message was from a completely different number. As soon as I opened it, I knew the tone. Teresa, my aunt, was there. She must have been lured in by Mom. "Whatever's going on, your mom says you're being irrational. Can we talk?" I didn't answer. The calls increased the following morning. A voicemail was left from a blocked number. Rosalind was the one. She spoke in a tremulous, quieter tone than normal. "I'm not mad, I swear. I can't get a hold of anyone. My school emailed saying I have a balance or they'll drop my classes. Can you please just talk to Mom? She's not herself right now." She was in tears. Just tears, no guilt tripping, no shouting. And it broke something inside of me, I'll admit. I didn't call back though. I cared too much for too long. Not because I didn't care. Then, using a friend's number, Mom arrived. First, a text. "Please, this has gone too far. Let's talk, like a family." She called a minute later. I let the voicemail go. And based on what I heard, she wasn't exactly upset. She spoke cautiously, almost beseechingly, but with the same pride. "You've made your point, we get it. But this isn't how families act. We're not perfect. But we've always had each other. I don't know what you want from me. Do you want me to beg?" And no apology, still. She didn't acknowledge what she said to me with a single word. They didn't even acknowledge that they had gone too far. A woman accustomed to having authority realized that the floor had abruptly disappeared. Their son was still alive. Their lifeline was gone. After a few days, you would think it would be simpler to ignore them, but it wasn't. It became more bizarre. The messages changed over time. I was initially terrified, then guilt. Then the history was rewritten. As if I hadn't paid for 4 years of his college tuition like it was a monthly Netflix subscription. Jake launched a wall of text messages about how I'd always made everything about money, and how he never asked for help anyhow. With a dramatic, "I wish things didn't have to be like this," Rosalind responded as though I had abruptly vanished in the middle of the night. And then Mom's voice memo. I gave it a try. That was sufficient. "You think we used you. That's not fair. We relied on you because we thought you wanted to help. You never said no. You always showed up. You were the strong one." She was correct, in the manner I'd always appeared, so that bit really got to me. Strength, however, is limited. It has become old. It deteriorates. Additionally, it's not family when people only ever support you after the checks stop coming in. A transaction, that is. I thus totally ignored them. The new numbers were blocked. All significant accounts have been moved to private. With one silent tap, I exited the family group chat. About it, I didn't post. I refrained from venting. I didn't strike back. I simply disappeared from their ledger. It's funny how quickly someone loses visibility when their name doesn't have a dollar sign next to it. The calls decreased at the end of the week. Silence crept in between the texts. They left a hole that didn't feel like a loss. It had the feel of vastness. Space to breathe. Space to reflect. There is space to envision a life free from obligations. I recognized then that I wasn't done giving them money. I had finished introducing myself. I slept in the morning after blocking the final number. The "no one needs anything from me" kind of way, not the indulgent, lazy kind. No phone that vibrates. No bank notifications. By Friday there was no mental inventory of who required what. Only the sound of my own breathing and the sun on my face. I brewed actual coffee. Not the instant crap I had been consuming to help pay my home electricity bill. As I sat at my kitchen table, I came to an almost ridiculous realization. I now own this money. I then turned on my laptop. I looked at my balance and opened my budgeting app, which I used to regard like a war report. I then began enumerating everything I had consistently said someday to. I'm going to travel someday. I'll start my own company someday. I'll invest in myself someday. Abruptly, someday it became today. I started by booking a flight to Lisbon, no stops over, a seat by the window. I kept it a secret. I didn't have to. I didn't need anyone's approval to disappoint them. No longer. I then scheduled a meeting with a small business advisor. For years I'd harbored a dream of opening a creative studio that specialized in branding for independent artists. I had aided countless others in creating their futures. Perhaps it was time for me to construct my own. I had accomplished more for my future by noon than I had in the previous 5 years. No phone calls. Don't text. Not guilty. Only freedom. And it had the same flavor as that initial coffee sip. However, I didn't necessarily block the memories just because I blocked the numbers. Like background noise you didn't notice until the silence made it clear, they infiltrated stealthily. Mom used to text me every Sunday at 9 a.m., and I would suddenly remember that while I was strolling down the street. Acerbic. Did the money come through yet? No salutation, no, how are you, just a reminder of my duties. Or, out of habit, I would hesitate when I was at the grocery store, reaching for something as basic as good cheese, because for years, every purchase I made was accompanied by guilt. When Dad saw a new jacket I had purchased on clearance, he once remarked, "It must be nice." Guess the rest of us just have to struggle. Helping was never the goal, it had to do with control. The kind of subtle, silent, sneaky control that creeps into your bones and makes you mistake it for love. It was louder than I had anticipated during that first week of silence. Because I had to discover who I was for the first time without their need to define me. To be honest, I had no idea. Not quite yet. However, I was beginning to learn. I went to a museum alone, bought a new sketchbook, started drawing again. Little things, small pieces of me I hadn't touched in years because I was too busy stitching together the pieces of their lives. I occasionally still looked at my phone, half expecting to see another number that might have slipped through the cracks. But they didn't. Eventually they stopped trying. Or maybe they finally understood that I meant it this time. That I was done. There's a strange kind of grief that comes when you stop being who everyone expects you to be. Not because you miss them, but because you start realizing how much of yourself you never really knew. The truth was, I had been a ghost in my own life for nearly a decade. I had moved cities, not because I wanted to explore, but because it made it easier to send money without questions. I worked late nights, not for ambition, but to afford my brother's textbooks. I stayed single, not because I wanted to, but because anytime I tried to build something with someone, I felt like a fraud. How could I invite someone into my life when that life wasn't mine to begin with? I was too busy funding other people's dreams. That week after cutting them off, I started piecing things together. Not just finances but fragments of who I used to be. I dug through an old drawer and found a dusty journal from years ago. Pages full of plans I'd forgotten I ever wrote. One entry read, "I want to open a space where people come to create. I want it to be beautiful, warm, a little messy, and a lot honest." I sat there rereading that line a dozen times. It was written in a coffee shop after a shift I barely survived, back when I still believed I'd have a life of my own someday. That dream of opening a creative studio was still there, just buried under years of maybe laters, and not until Jake graduates, and mom needs new tires. But now, no more excuses. No more siphoning my energy into a hole that never said thank you. I emailed a realtor about commercial spaces in my area. I signed up for a small business course. I reached out to people I'd lost touch with. Not family, but the friends I pushed aside because they didn't understand what I was dealing with. And I told the truth. I'm finally doing something for me. The response was overwhelming. One friend said, "It's about time." Another replied, "I thought I lost you." They hadn't. I'd just been buried. But now I was starting to unearth something I thought was gone for good. Hope. There were still tough moments. Nights where I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Moments where I missed the idea of family more than the people themselves. But those moments didn't define me anymore. What defined me was the sound of silence, not filled with guilt. The sight of my bank balance slowly rising. The feeling of drawing in that sketchbook, page after page, without apology. I was no longer the backup plan for people who never made space for mine. I have my own plan now. The silence lasted about 2 weeks. Then they tried again. But not directly this time. It was softer, more calculated. The kind of manipulation that's dressed up in concern and stitched together with nostalgia. A message came through Instagram. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, just checking in. Your mom says you haven't been around much. She's worried. Is everything okay?" I looked at it for a while. The phrase was so careful. Haven't been around, not cut them off. Not after everything they said. It seemed as if the last decade of sacrifices had been wiped, rebuilt with a story that made them the abandoned ones. I didn't respond. 2 days later my dad emailed me. An actual email, something he never does. It was short. "Whatever issues you have with your mother, we can work it out. You've made your point. Don't let your pride cost you your family." I sat there reading it over and over and felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just the boring weight of familiarity. That was the language of our family. Pride. Duty. Point made. As if I'd thrown a tantrum instead of walking away from years of exploitation. But then came the ultimate crack. Rosalind. Her voicemail was left. No showmanship this time. Only her voice, tired and subdued. "I know you think we used you. Maybe we did. I don't know. I'm not mad. I'm just tired. I didn't ask for this. None of us did." But she was mistaken there. They expected, even if they didn't ask directly. I was expected to arrive, pay, be modest, and remain silent. They were at a loss for what to do when I didn't. Because my obedience had been their solace for years. Their safety net. My sacrifice. They weren't mourning anyone now that it was gone. They were mourning a breadwinner. I believe they secretly understood they had lost me, because I had finally realized the truth. Not because they were harsh or angry. I was unable to avoid seeing it. I paid the deposit on a studio space the same week. It had light, despite its flaws. Old floorboards, creaking windows, exposed pipes. In the afternoons, warm, golden light spilled into the back. With a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years, I signed the lease. I owned this. Not transient, not borrowed, and not dependent on keeping others afloat. The walls were painted by me. White with a single accent of rich green that gave the space a vibrant atmosphere. I arranged a large table with chairs that didn't match. Some art books were donated by a friend. I was assisted by another in hanging shelves. I kept it a secret from everyone. I didn't give a speech or post a grand opening. I simply sat down at my desk, opened the door, and let out a breath. I can still hear their voices in my thoughts on some days. "Why don't you come home more? Your sister needs help with books. You know mom's not good with money. It's not a real career, but at least it pays." Now, however, they echo. Far away. Helpless. Bending is no longer my style. The wallet in the room isn't me. I'm not the handy phantom people summon when the tuition is due, and the refrigerator is empty. I am who I am. And that's finally enough for the first time in my life. That year, spring arrived early. The kind of balmy breeze that fools you into believing the world is kinder than it actually is, and causes the trees to bloom too soon. I saw it as I was on my way back from my studio. My studio. A number you know. I didn't identify it, therefore I hadn't blocked it. For too long my hand lingered over the screen. Curiosity always prevails. I replied. Hey, Rosalind murmured in a faint, gentle voice. They want to have dinner. Just talk. No strings. I told them I'd ask you. A long pause ensued. She waited as if she had grown accustomed to being disregarded. Then she said, I think they miss you. I let the silence linger. Then I asked one important question. Did they apologize? She let out a sigh. They said they want to move on. I nearly grinned. It was there. Sorry, just jump right to the reunion scene and skip the bit when they confess what they did. I'm not coming, I declared. Why not? She asked in a broken voice that was not furious but rather something else. Perhaps confused. I worried that I had always meant it. Because it isn't healing to go on without taking responsibility. Denial is the cause. And that story no longer includes me. Another extended gap ensued. Then she said, I guess I'll see you around then. I didn't respond. We were both aware that she wouldn't. Almost painfully, the next weeks were calm once more. Burner texts are over. No voicemails filled with guilt. No, we must discuss emails. They seem to have finally come to terms with my leaving. Not to cover the expenses. Not to take on their embarrassment. Not to act as though it had all been completed, but rather as if it had just happened. Officially, I was no longer part of their tale. It was also serene. Peaceful, but not easy. And in that silence, I was able to accomplish things I had never permitted myself to do before. I used my studio to host a workshop, a branding course for creatives in the area. There were 5 people present. After their first client won, one of them sent me a thank you card while crying. It was pinned on the wall by me. I had dinner with a girl I had not spoken to in years. I didn't think I deserved someone who didn't need me, not because I didn't like her. She asked questions about my artwork as if she genuinely cared about the answers, and she laughed at my crude jokes. I was honest with her. Instead of transferring funds to another person's account, I began saving. I made another travel reservation. Just to explore, not to flee. To survive. Occasionally I would glance at my phone and think, this is how peace feels. Not a lack. Liberty. In retrospect, I have no regrets. I didn't give those years because they showed me how far I would go for love. And not when I stopped, because that's when I realized how far I was prepared to go for myself. Thanks for watching and diving into this wild family drama with me. If you love Reddit family drama, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.